So in this section of notes, we're talking about cell communication. We've already talked about the different types of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic, and have talked about things that they had in common, the unity between them, as well as the diversity. And we're also going to see that when we discuss cell communication, there will be differences between those prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, and as having diversity between the unicellular and multicellular organisms. But first thing that we should think about is, what does the word communication mean? Communication is going to involve two things. And the two things that are going to occur with communication is the release of a signal, such as a hormone or a chemical, and how or when is that signal received, okay? So for communication to occur, two things must happen. There must be a signal, and it must be received or must have some sort of receptor for that to occur. Looking at this quote right here, it says, "No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of a continent." And this really applies to communication and the fact that even within a single-celled organism like bacteria, while it might be unicellular, it does not live by itself. And for it to be successful, it must live with others of its kind to perform a specific function or to be able to continue its species. So in addition to thinking about cell communication, the fact that we have a hormone or a chemical signal, we have some sort of reception, you just need to keep in mind that all cells interact with other cells and their environment. Okay? So the first type of cell that we're going to talk about, or the first form of communication that we'll talk about, is between the bacteria cells. Okay? So these are our prokaryotic cells. And remember that we had the two kingdoms, archaea and eubacteria. Eubacteria being the bacteria that more commonly we're interacting with. The interesting thing about bacteria cells is that we've actually learned that bacteria cells are able to communicate with each other between the species and among separate bacterial species. And so if you look right here, we have some free-living bacteria. What actually occurs is something called quorum sensing. What this means, a quorum is like a group, okay? A quorum is a group. And so when you have a group of bacteria amongst each other, they actually, or individually, they actually release little signals. So you can imagine these triangles being a signal. And if you had just one little bacteria alone, and it was releasing its little chemical signal, its little hormone, and if this signal, and there's no others there, it would just move out into space, and there would be no communication with that bacteria. However, if you had other bacteria cells there, the signals would actually move to each other, and they would be able to communicate that way. When the bacteria gets to a point where there's many of them, or a bigger colony of them, then they can actually jointly release the signals, identify that other bacteria are around, and actually create some sort of collective response. For example, this can actually happen in the bacteria that cause disease. If you think about a human and the number of cells, the trillions of cells that make up a human, well, those cells would need a huge amount of signal from the bacteria in order to affect that organism. And so when the bacteria get into a group that's big enough to cause an effect in the organism, in the host that they're inside of, then they can actually release a joint signal. So when you think about this and with the bacteria, this group, you can remind yourself that density of local cells is a factor. So what basically happens is that the bacteria can create something known as a biofilm, and you don't really have to worry about the word itself. But just know that a joint effort